from the very beginning, it was a little bit underwhelming, I guess. There was very, very little communication what was going to happen. The only answers I got or information I got about the class was questions that I emailed them. And even that felt a little bit short.
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. When most divers sign up for that next course, we have high hopes and usually expectations are met. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. Sometimes we as students leave disappointed and frustrated at our own lack of ability to meet all the standards and requirements. And sometimes it's completely out of our control and falls on those in charge of the course. I'll be the first to say that I've made mistakes as an instructor and things do not always go to plan. As an instructor, the highest priority is always safety. I feel that creating an environment to learn and master skills, but also leaving students with a great experience is equally important. Once again, this is not always the case. In this interview, I speak with Josh. After a disappointing course out of his control, Josh took to ScubaBoard to speak about his frustrations with his recent experience. In classic ScubaBoard fashion, the masses came out, and this now closed thread became a heated discussion with some of the usual characters and many more weighing in and giving their thoughts and opinions. I reached out to Josh to see if he would be interested in coming onto the show to speak about his experience. It's not always easy for a student to speak out about a bad experience after a class, so I want to send a big thank you to Josh for agreeing to come onto the podcast. Josh, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
It's a little early. I'm not gonna lie. I'm usually just about getting up around this time. Most days I'm up by 6 a.m., but today I had to wake up a little bit earlier just so I could be ready on the podcast at 6 a.m. So not too bad, but definitely when you have to wake up a little bit early, it kind of throws you off a little bit. So.
Yeah, I'm not a morning person, so I feel for you.
Ah, right on. How's the weather over there? You're in Minnesota, is that correct?
Yep, I'm in Minnesota, kind of the Fargo-Moorhead area, so like the northwest side or middle of the state, kind of west side of Minnesota. It's hot and muggy the last few days. It's been like, I think the actual temperature is like 80 or something, but it feels like it's almost 100. It's just gross outside right now. Okay. Yeah, it's we're hitting, I think we're starting monsoon season. I'm based in Malaysia. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but and yeah, it's been raining a lot, so it's not the best, but I do prefer the rain over like hot, dry heat. So it's could be worse. But so my first question I wanted to ask you is, so tell me how and why you got into scuba diving. Like, what led into you wanting to become certified? Well, honestly, from a really young age, my dad got certified before I was born. I think in the late 70s or very early 80s, he got certified. And just listen to him and my uncles talk about it. It sounded, as a kid, like magical. How do you swim underwater and breathe underwater? It just seemed like it shouldn't work. And so I was just fascinated by it. Unfortunately, he didn't get to dive a whole lot. He died when I was pretty young. But I still have his logbook, so every once in a while I read through that. And that's pretty cool. So then I really wanted to when I was, young. I think what I was told 14 was when I could really start, but I don't think my mom was super thrilled about doing that. So it wasn't until I was actually in college, my freshman year of college, I saw a flyer for our local dive shop that's like, oh, you can do a dive class and get college credit for it. So I signed up for it, and turns out I paid for college credit, but I didn't actually get it. It didn't count for anything for me. So, I got the credit, but it didn't help with my degree or anything. So, but it was a blast. We did, it was like a whole semester long, which I think in hindsight, knowing what I know now, was probably much better training than some other people get like in a weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had to stretch it out for a whole semester, we got, weeks worth of pool sessions, and it was a lot of classroom time compared to what I've heard people get. Also, that was in 2001, so I don't know if training's changed since then. But Yeah, it was great. And jumping into the water for the first time, for me, it felt pretty natural. I know some people are a little skittish about it, a little scared with that, but ever since I was a kid, all I wanted to do is breathe in water. So when the time came, I was ready for it.
Oh, that's awesome, man. No, and that's definitely to have the class stretched out over weeks. Definitely gave you a lot of added skills and time to work on skills. Because I don't want to say most, but I know a big portion of scuba divers that will get certified. They'll go out kind of on that vacation. They might only be on vacation for a week, and the training has gotten very slimmed down just because people are competing with each other. So it's like, oh, if they'll do a open water course in 4 days, we'll get you done in 3 days. We'll get you done in 2 days, and then it just becomes shorter and shorter, and then the standards. It's kind of a vicious cycle of what's going on out there, because obviously people have to make money, but at the end of the day, when you cut the training down so much, and then on top of that, it's these beautiful blue tropic waters where visibility is just 100 feet in every direction. So it's some of the easiest conditions to be certified in.
Yeah, for sure.
Where I'm assuming, did you do your actual open water in like a freshwater lake out there?
Yep. So about 2.5 hours east of us, there's a bunch of mine pits that were mined. I don't know when they stopped, but then since flooded. So, for Minnesota, it's pretty good visibility. Water temperatures are still usually pretty cold, but, the first 20, 30 feet until you hit that thermocline, it can be pretty nice in the summer. After that, it gets a little chilly. But yeah, that's where I did mine, and it's much better there than a lot of the other local lakes that I dive in, where, you maybe 5 feet of visibility, 10 feet if you're lucky on a good day. The mine pits have, I don't know, 20, 30 feet sometimes. I think probably better. I haven't dove there a whole lot, but so yeah.
Yeah, and Minnesota, that's the land of 10,000 lakes, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they say. There are definitely a lot of them. Unfortunately, I think many of them are not really the greatest for diving. I mean, they're cold and not very clear, but it sure makes you appreciate the better diving when you get it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, awesome, man, and I'm glad that you had such a good open water class experience, because obviously, why I asked you to come on here today was I found you on ScubaBoard about a post that you had put up, and yeah, one is kind of a bummer, but can you tell a little bit about that whole experience, and then that way everybody can hear about what had happened, and it is a bummer that it had to go down that way.
Yeah. So first off, it was neither of my local dive shops. So we have two. We have a PADI shop and an SSI shop. My open water is through PADI. I've done some other training with SSI, rescue training and dry suit and things like that. Both of those shops are great. The SSI shop, he's kind of in the process of retiring, so he's just not doing a lot of classes. The local PADI shop, their advanced open waters were on weekends that I couldn't do it this summer. And I really wanted to do it because me and a friend went to Lake Superior a few weeks ago to do some wreck diving off of a boat. And I was worried, some of those wrecks aren't super deep, but 70, 80, 90 feet. And I didn't know if the boat captain was going to be like, oh, nope, you can't do those if you aren't advanced open water, because some are. So I was like, I got to get it done. So I found not a local shop that had a class. And I was like, well, I'll sign up for that. It fortunately it's relatively close to me, only a few hours away, and I have some family in the area. So I was able to stay there for the weekend. And when we did the class, it was like, from the very beginning, it was a little bit underwhelming, I guess. There was very, very little communication what was going to happen. The only answers I got, or information I got about the class, was questions that I emailed them. And even that felt a little bit short. And then we showed up for the class, and the first part of it was in the classroom, and that was maybe an hour and a half. And the instructor told us right off the bat that it was just not his first time doing instruction, but his first time doing advanced open water, which doesn't really bother me. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that dove for years before they did any formal training, and so they are probably great instructors. But he said, oh, this is my first advanced open water class. And then he didn't even have the right manuals. His manuals from when he did his advanced open waters like 20 years ago or something like that. So we'd read a question and be like, oh, that's not in my book. And I'm like, how are you teaching us if you don't even have the right manuals? We went around and really all we did was read the knowledge reviews, and each person read a question and then gave what their answer was. And he would just on the spot be like, oh yeah, those ones are the right answers. And there was a handful of them that, like, I don't want to think that I'm better than an instructor necessarily, but I really like research. And so I was pretty confident that all my answers were right. I read through the book multiple times, not just the chapters that we were doing, not just night diving. I did all of them because I was like, well, why not? I paid for the book. And there was a handful of answers where I'm pretty sure he was telling people the wrong answers.
Oh,
man. I mean, most of them were like not that big of a deal. I don't think he's going to kill anybody, but still, it was like, what do we even pay for? Which I'll admit, our class wasn't very expensive compared to some of the other places, so I guess you do get what you pay for.
Yeah.
But there was a couple people that were supposed to be in the class and decided not to show up, which is fine. I'm sure something came up, but I think that really threw him for a loop. He wasn't ready for it. And so that was like, he spent the first half an hour of what should have been class. I think him and the dive shop owner making calls, trying to figure out, are you coming? Are you not coming? So we started off late anyways. And then the other thing I thought was so weird was we didn't get any paperwork ahead of time. We filled it out while we did. So half of our class, or maybe not half of it, but a decent portion, was just filling out the paperwork together. And the thing, probably one of the ones that bothered me almost more than anything else is, being an instructor, you got to do the medical waiver. And he hands it to us and he's like, well, I really hope nobody has anything that they check yes on, because otherwise you can't dive today. And it really, really felt like that was a warning, or maybe not a warning, a suggestion. Like, even if you do, check no, because otherwise you're going to not dive today. And I'm like, first of all, that should have been done weeks ahead of time. There's no reason. I mean, that's 2023. Email us a copy and we can fill it out.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
And some of the people in our class were pretty new divers. And so it's not like, like me and a couple other people had been through a series of other classes before. I knew a little bit more what to expect, but there was one guy, I think, that maybe this was his, I think he said he had 12 dives. So he hadn't signed up for many other classes to know he got a medical waiver. And then the next morning we found out, after we did our first series of dives, which we'll go back to, but speaking of paperwork, we found out that one of the divers was not 18. He filled out all his information and did not get a parent signature. And so he should not have been diving on Friday.
Oh, wow.
He absolutely shouldn't have. And so they were scrambling. So we spent, a bit of time Saturday morning trying to get that signed off so that the shop was, doing the right thing, which, yes, the diver absolutely should have spoke up. We're all responsible for ourselves, but I would have pegged him under 18. I don't understand how they didn't ask the question. Fortunately, they got it all figured out and got the proper paperwork for him. But yeah, then we show up to our dive site, and it was pretty unorganized. There was very minimal dive briefings. It felt pretty clear the whole time. I mean, on more than one occasion, he mentioned, all we got to do is make 15 minutes or whatever is required for the dive. We did peak performance buoyancy and navigation. If you ask me, they were done as one dive. I mean, we didn't get out of the water. We did the briefing for both ahead of time. And then we went to the surface, sat by the dive flag for a few minutes, talked about what was next. And then we went down and we did buoyancy first, which was a joke. And then we did navigation. The buoyancy one, he right off the bat said, wow, we're not going to do any weight checks. You guys have been diving enough that you should know, or something to that effect. I'm like, that is absolutely I think the biggest thing that you should do for your buoyancy is check everybody's weight.
100%, yeah.
I mean, at that point, I think I was about 50 dives, which is not many. I mean, there's plenty of people out there with way more than that. And I absolutely felt like my weight was not in check. I don't know how any of the other people felt, but I can imagine probably similar, or maybe they didn't even know. Maybe they didn't even know that their weight was not good. But we didn't do that. All we did was swim through a couple rings, and I don't even think the instructor looked at us. We got up to the surface, and he's like, oh, how everybody's trim workout? And one of the other kind of dive masters was like, yeah, good. And that was it. Like that was the peak performance buoyancy. It was like all we did was swim around to make that 15 minutes, checked off the box, we were done. Oh, I guess we did hover, right? You have to hover for a minute or whatever it is, 30 seconds. That was the only time we did anything not on our knees, really. I was trying, jumping ahead a few dives, we did a search and recovery, and I was trying to do my knot test not on my knees, and he stopped me like 3 times and kept motioning for me to go on my knees, and I was like, all right, well, if I ever want to do this, I guess I have to. But I was trying, man. I was trying my best to do it, but he was just not interested in it. So yeah, we did our navigation next. So that was the second dive. We didn't change tanks because we didn't get out of the water. And granted, they weren't very long dives, but it certainly made us, me and my buddy both, were running a little bit low on air. I mean, not like dangerously low on air, but enough that it's like we kind of had to rush through our stuff. We didn't get much time. We didn't get to do the reciprocal, out and back because we ran out of time. So we had to do that the next day, which I did it because I'm a rule follower. He would not have made us. He absolutely would have been like, you guys are good. But I did it. Like I said, I'm a rule follower. So, but yeah, I mean, there was really not a lot of dive briefing. So we were in an old iron mine. The only thing that he did tell us that I guess I'll give him credit for was that sometimes your compass doesn't work. You'll be swimming around because there's so much iron around there. I suppose like maybe being in a wreck. I've never really been in a wreck, but all of a sudden, like at one point, my compass just kind of spun for a minute. I'm like, well, that's not normal. And I just waited and it went back to normal, but he at least warned us about it. But I expected to do some land training, which we were in this tiny little parking lot. So we did a very, very minimal training on land with our compass, which I think showed up later with a couple that were in the class. They were both struggling. I mean, I don't think they really knew how to use their compass, but that's what they were there for, right? To learn.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, they did eventually get it, but it took a few tries over the different dives where they were doing their compass to do the square pattern, before they actually really could check that off. But we were so delayed starting that we rushed into the night dive. That was the third dive of Friday night. One of the students who he had a much better sac rate than I do, did not change his tank at all. So he did 3 dives essentially on a tank, which, man, I'd have ran out of air long before that. Again, we cut that dive. I think it was like 21 minutes, which was probably our longest dive of all of the weekend. But we cut it short because him and one of the other gals, I think, both were running low. So then we turned around, again, there was really just no dive briefing. Those first 3 dives, I don't think I learned a skill, and that's not because I'm a super skilled diver. It's because they didn't teach anything. And there was no feedback really whatsoever, which was super frustrating. I mean, I knew going into it, I'd read people's experiences. I didn't expect much, but I sure expected a lot more than that.
Yeah. No, I mean, you should have received a lot more than that, without a doubt. No, that's there's a lot to digest there. So
yeah, then the next morning was our deep dive, which that one was probably the one that blew me away. I think maybe in my post I talk about it kind of in detail, but that one blew me away more than any of them, because we get out there and he said, we're going to go, the platform's at about 80 feet. And he's got another diver there that went down and set a line so that we could drop down on the line. And he comes back up. He's like, oh yeah, it's 93 feet. And I'm thinking that's a pretty big difference. And there was no discussion with any of the divers. Like, is everybody good with that? There was no talk about like, well, from 80 to 90 feet, there's even more of a chance of narcosis, and which that just in dive training in general, that kind of blows my mind. Like, to me, that is something that people should at least think about, be aware of, that it could happen. And to do your quote unquote deep dive, and I read people are like, oh yeah, mine was 62 feet. That was my deep dive. Well, that's nothing. I feel like you just aren't getting any additional information or skills from that. To come up and be like, it was 80 feet, and now it's 96 feet. How he didn't know. I mean, they dive there all the time. He hadn't dove there for a while, the instructor, but the shop dives there all the time. Like, how do you not know it's 96? That was definitely one where I thought about it and I'm like, well, I'm good with it. Like, I'm comfortable with it. I'm in a dry suit, which was very warm. Everybody else was in wetsuits, so like I'm good with it as long as they're good with it. He took him in two groups. There was 3 in the first group. That was a very short dive. There was one diver in particular that got very cold, and so they kind of thumbed the dive. And from what I understand, there was some other issues, like after they thumbed the dive, one of the other divers, their regular started free flowing, and which was fine. Like everybody was good. I will say the instructor did a good job with that. It seemed like he handled that situation pretty well. He did warn us that because it is so cold there, that could happen, and you can breathe through it. He kind of went through that prep, so he did do a little bit of dive briefing there. He also carried another kind of big pony bottle. I think it was probably like a 40 with a long hose regulator. So like if something did go wrong, you didn't even have to share air. You could, you didn't have to use somebody's alternate. You could just breathe off of that. And I think that's what happened is he turned the other kid's air off that was free flowing and then gave him that one. They came to the surface. And so, I mean, like, I won't fault him for that, right? That's things happen, and that other diver got nervous or uncomfortable or whatever it was and made the right call. Absolutely. Didn't power through it. And I feel like I've seen people do that, not necessarily in diving, but in other things where they do things that are unsafe or that make them uncomfortable because they feel like they have to or because they paid for it or whatever. But then when we went to do our deep dive, I honestly don't even know what the requirements are for the deep dive. I bet you we didn't meet any of them because my buddy was very clearly having some issues. And again, my buddy handled it pretty well. He kept himself calm even though he was on the verge of panic. And my instructor handled it pretty well. He focused on him, kept him at arm's length, but was also right there and made sure he kept him as calm as he could. And so we made it down to the platform, and we were there for just a minute, maybe 2 minutes at most before we started to ascend again. And it took me a little while. I mean, I would guess he probably had to go up 20, 30 feet before my buddy started kind of feeling better. So, I don't know if that was narcosis or what the deal was, or if he just was, I think he was a lot colder than he expected to be. So I'm sure that didn't help. We sat at our safety stop. We actually did 2 of them because I think what happened is my buddy's computer was not quite shallow enough to register that he hit his stop. And so we did a stop based off of my computer and my instructor's computer. And then we went up a couple feet, and then his computer started beeping that we needed to do a stop. I think that second stop is the only reason we hit our time requirement for that dive. Otherwise, we would have surfaced before that time requirement. So I think, or pretty close. I think my computer said it was an 18-minute dive. So that second stop would have put us at 15. I'll tell you, I certainly don't feel like I'm qualified to go do a deep dive on my own now with a inexperienced buddy or as experienced as me without really thinking through how that would work. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, oh, you don't need to do that. You can just go out, and that's one of the things that people say in the post is like, oh, you don't need training, just go out and practice. Well, I don't know. I think there's some truth to that for sure, but also there's in good training, there's a lot of benefit to it.
Yeah, no, and well, one thing about the deep dive too, the conditions that you were in, it was kind of a little bit. I don't know if this was on or off the podcast, but if you go to the tropical deep blue where it's 100
yeah.
plus feet of visibility, you'll go down there and it's crazy because 100 feet it literally feels no different than 50 feet because the visibility is so clear. I mean, I've been down at 140 feet and I can still see the surface, and I'm like, this is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, for sure.
You get to 90 feet, 80 feet in Lake Travis in Texas. I mean, it's a whole nother world. It's practically like we would joke around and be like, it's pretty much a night dive because like you get down there, the light's gone, you need your flashlight, really it's cold. And so it's very, very different conditions. But no, it's sad to hear that whole scenario. And so just I guess a couple questions. The instructor, you were saying he was a newer instructor, but he'd been diving for a long time. So I'm assuming he just started at that shop, or how did that work? Did you get any backstory on that?
I don't really know for sure. I mean, I think he said he'd been diving for about 20 years, if I remember, like early 2000s. But I think he said he got his instructor certificate like in 16, but I don't think he did much instruction. I don't really know. It looks like that shop has probably like a lot of shops, they have a bunch of instructors and they just, people sign up for dates of what classes they want to teach and when. And I know he had done some open waters, but that was his first advanced open water. That sounds like that's about as much as I know, just kind of what he said. So
yeah, no, and definitely. And you said that there was a dive master and another instructor there, like helping.
Well, there was. I don't know what their actual qualifications were. There was one guy that was on both days of diving. I do know that he was some sort of technical diver because we were talking about that, just some of his technical training. But I don't know if he was any kind of instructor or what. I'm not sure what his qualifications were. He kind of helped out and just, I don't know, watched the class a little bit. On Friday night, there was another guy. Again, I don't know what his qualifications were, but he was also, we broke up into 3 groups. There was 5 divers, but one of the divers just dove with one of the, we'll call them assistant instructors. But we broke up into those groups, and the main instructor followed one group. This other guy followed me, and then the third group had the other assistant instructor. Yeah, I don't really know what their qualifications are, and I'm honestly not sure if, I'm sure there's a ratio. I don't know what it is for your advanced open waters, but maybe one of them was to help with that.
It's been a while since I've taught a advanced class, but nobody should have indirect supervision, so that's why they had, anytime you guys were off kind of doing your own thing, you should have somebody supervising you. That's hopefully they were either a DM, assistant instructor, or instructor helping you out while you were doing your skills. Because if it's somebody that's just a technical diver that just knows stuff but is not a certified instructor, then that's when it kind of becomes weary. But no, there's definitely a lot there that went wrong, and obviously, on behalf of a lot of instructors, I apologize for that. That sucks. I mean, at the end of the day, it just sucks because things like that do give the industry agencies just a bad name in general, subpar training, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot of remarks. I mean, I think your post, did you expect it was going to get that type of feedback? I think it's over like 15,000 views and over 500 responses.
No, I really didn't. I thought it was funny, and I was pretty careful in my post, I think, because I wasn't trying to agency bash. I didn't say who it was through, although it's pretty obvious. I mean, like, yeah, I think not obvious because of what happened, just obvious because of the structure. But I think, I don't know, I more than anything, I think it was just me sort of venting is not even the right word, like just share that experience. And I've heard, even before this, I heard instruction matters. Like, pick an instructor, don't care about the agency, pick an instructor that you're comfortable with. That's the most important. And like I said before, I went into this one knowing that it was really just to collect that card to give me a pass on a boat, right? And funnily enough, I don't think that the boat that I ended up going on that trip would have cared one bit. I think he cared a lot more about what you're comfortable of and what you're capable of than he did what your card says. So, I think he would have let me do any dive that I wanted and I was comfortable with without, not without certification, but without advanced open water certification. But that's why I did it. I signed up for that class just to collect that card for that pass on the boat. And so when I made that post, it wasn't, like I said, I wasn't trying to industry bash. I was careful to point out that this is not my local shop because my profile says where I'm from, I'm pretty sure, or at least it used to. So I don't want to give them a bad name, and I just wanted to outline the story, and I did not expect, kind of cracked me up, like, I think in the first day there was 10 pages of posts, and then it just kept going and going, and certainly I'm out of it now, like, it is well beyond me and my story in that post. It's a lot of bickering.
Yeah, and I absolutely love ScubaBoard. One of the funniest things that I've heard one time is ScubaBoard is a great place to go get information, but the bad thing about ScubaBoard is you have to go on ScubaBoard to get it. So
yeah,
and it is true. Yeah, because it really will become into a bickering fest, and So actually, I tried to get away because there is a lot of the keyboard heroes out there, or keyboard divers, I should say. So I actually was like a big motivation for me to start. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to listen to any of the roundtables. I've only released like 2 of them, but to get groups of divers, into a room and speak face to face, because I feel like once you kind of come out from behind the keyboard, the people's mentalities and people will be a little bit different than if you're just hiding behind the keyboard. And it's been a little bit successful. I've had some groups come on. I think I have like 3 or 4. 2 are out, 2 are about to be out, and because the sometimes the threads, the pages will literally, like, you'll start reading through some, and then the next like 4 pages are of 2 or 3 people just going back and forth with each other because they've been on there for 5, 10, 20 years, however long. Just they're at odds with each other.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some people that it's personal. It is not in that thread. There are people that this is just the thread they decided to fight on. It's not the first time they've done it, is my understanding, or kind of how I see it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. ScubaBoard, that place can be. It's not for the lighthearted, that's for sure.
No.
Out of all, I don't know if you have completely read through them. If you I have not. So it gets kind of like, after a while, you're just kind of like, okay, these people are just arguing
over and over again.
Yeah. Have you gotten any good information or anything that you'd want to take from? Because usually, there is information to take away from, but you just got to sift through all the stuff.
Yeah, it takes a little while to distill it out. Yeah, and see. Yeah, I mean, I think I have. I think probably the biggest thing that I got was just a little bit of, I guess misery loves company. So I've heard from a few people, both on the thread and in private messages, of like basically just like, yeah, that sucks. That's sorry that you did that. Don't give up or whatever. And I'm certainly not going to give up diving, but I can see is how this experience would put some people off, absolutely. And so to have a community of people, or at least some of them, just be like, yeah, don't give up. I think that's really great. Like I said, there's been a few people that have reached out privately. It was funny when you asked me to be on this. I did start listening to your podcast, and what's his name? Costa? Is that his name?
Yeah, Costa. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was actually, he's one of the people that's active on that thread, and he's one that reached out to me, and just we had a nice conversation over private message of kind of his past and his his theory of teaching, and really he reassured or reaffirmed that the instructor matters, and if you get a good instructor, it doesn't matter what agency they are, if you get a good instructor, you'll get good instruction. So I think, I don't know, it's fun to meet some people that way, and certainly I've met a lot more people than I ever thought I would, because of that random post. Like I said, it was just a little bit of misery loves company, so I just wanted to complain a little bit and just get it out there, and man, it like you said, it blew up. I think it's at like 50 some pages a post now.
Yeah, no, there's a lot, because so usually before I sign on with the guests, I'll kind of go through and see what's going on. I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm going through all these and I've kind of, I'll keep up on it a little bit, but it kind of sometimes does get to a point where I'm just like, okay, the last 3 pages are people just arguing, and then I'm like, I'll get back to this, at some point in time.
I think I read just about all of them. There's some of them that are long, and I could feel like I could tell where that post was going. I'm like, all right, I'm going to skip this because this is the same thing you said 4 pages ago, just in longer form. But for the most part, I've read all of them.
One, you have every right, and I don't look at it as complaining or venting. I guess venting, but you have every right to speak about what you thought about the class, especially a class on that note, just how it unfolded. Because there was a lot of wrong things that happened there, and I can't speak for the instructor, I can't speak for the shop, I don't know what's going on there, and I hate to kind of keep the story one-sided. The only thing that I was doing as I was reading through your post was kind of looking, because I became an instructor in 2020, and my instruction went great. Like, I have nothing but love for my course director that taught me. I am happy with all the instruction I got. I just know me as an instructor, like I have not always been the best instructor, and I was trying to see how I could get better throughout time, like with each class. Okay, well, what can I do to improve on that, or what can I do? Some of those standards that are set, it makes it a little bit tough. You can definitely you can definitely make it better, but it's can make it a little bit difficult, So like I personally think it's very difficult to get a advanced open water class. You said you did yours in 2 days, is that correct?
Yeah. Friday night and Saturday morning.
Yeah, so we sometimes would have 3 days, but I think it's like, unless you're really pushing it, like an advanced open water class, in my opinion, should be stretched out to like 3, if not even 4 days, like over the course of 2 weekends, just because it's a lot to digest in there. Like if you're trying to do navigation and people aren't getting it, especially if you have a group of people, one group doesn't get it, the other group gets it, then it's just like a whole kind of a nightmare situation. Yeah. So I actually took a step back kind of unwillingly, just because I moved to Malaysia and there's not really a whole lot of diving where I live. So I was like, okay, I'll just step back. I'll take more, time for myself, take classes so that way I can become a better instructor. And I'm actually in the process of like revamping my whole, like, okay, what courses am I going to offer? How am I going to teach? How can I make it better than I was? And I actually had a conversation with Costa. You said you listened to it on there about teaching. Yep. Yeah, that is a question that I do ask, because in a Discover Scuba Dive, that's people's first breaths underwater. I'm like, should there be a need for neutral buoyancy? I do see why there should be, but at that point, you're conducting an open water class is kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
Like if you're, that's where it's like, okay, well, where's the line between Discover and once you start teaching them? At that point, you're conducting an open water class. So, but on behalf of all instructors, I do apologize for that whole situation. It's not a good look, and I'm assuming you're probably just gonna kind of let bygones be bygones. Because I saw some people are like, you need to report them, you need to do this. I'm assuming. Or did you, or didn't you, or?
No, I reached out to the shop owner and I gave, basically almost copy and pasted my post. I changed some things so that it was written for him, and he responded and said that he would love to set up a phone call and talk to us about it. But I haven't heard back yet. He did tell me that he's pretty busy until fall, but I don't know. I was like, whatever. I mean, my schedule's pretty open. So whatever works for you, you just let me know. And I haven't heard back. I sort of doubt I will. I don't know. I've gone back and forth on whether or not I should report it. I know if you ask half the people on ScubaBoard, you should. And if you ask the other half, you should, but it wouldn't matter anyways. And I guess if that's true, that's kind of sad, but we'll see. I don't know. Like nothing there was inherently dangerous. I mean, I think the two things that I think were probably the biggest missteps were the medical release form. What I felt like was him telling us to fill it out inaccurately if we needed to.
Oh, that's a violation of standards 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, it just blows my mind. Like I said, why wouldn't you send that out early? There's no reason to. Oh, and I think I do know the reason. It's because I think that particular shop would have to fax it to people, and nobody has a fax machine because they're like a dinosaur shop. One of the students was trying to fill his logbook out on the PADI app, and he's like, yeah, I don't do that. Until they make me, I'm not going to do that. So he literally just took copies of a dive log, and that's what he filled out. So the dive log was another one. We didn't even get to that. I can't remember if I put it in the post or not, but we sat around, after our quote unquote 5 dives, we sat around and filled out our dive log together, and it was absolutely made up. I mean, the instructor's like, okay, put this for depth, put this for time. I didn't, because I was going to look at my computer anyways, because that's another thing. Like I said before, I'm a rule follower. Like if I know that my computer says one thing and then I wrote another thing in my logbook, it'll bother me for the rest of my life. So I was like, I can't just, even if it's close to accurate, if we started a dive at 7:30 but we wrote down 7:40, that would bother me. So I needed to do it right. But yeah, I mean, like, I think according to my logbook, if I would have filled out the way he said, we would have started our night dive at like 7:30. We didn't even leave the shop until close to 7:30, but he was so far off on his times that he was just kind of making up that's what our night dive, quote unquote started with. So I think, I don't know, we'll see if I report the shop to Patty if we ever do get a conversation. But I think some of the industry doesn't understand being, like from the Midwest, where oddly enough, my town has 2 dive shops in it. There arguably shouldn't be any, because there's the closest lake is like an hour away. And even that's probably not super worth diving in. So it doesn't really make sense that there's 2. They're both great shops. I'm glad they're here. But it's kind of like, how does a town of our size with no water nearby really support 2 dive shops? There's just not a lot to choose from. So if in this particular case, it's an area that I want to dive a lot, it doesn't make sense if I'm going to go for a long weekend to rent tanks in town and then pay for the whole weekend when I only need them Saturday. So if I blow the whistle on this shop, he's absolutely, I think, I don't know him very well, but he's absolutely the type that seems like I won't get them, right? They'll be out of tanks, or he'll maybe flat out tell me he doesn't want to rent them to me. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would take it better than that, but that's the concern. And so like, unfortunately, what's your recourse when they're the only shop around?
Oh man. Yeah. I know one gentleman who's very anti-shop, that he basically just started his own shop in his garage, like got a compressor and just did everything on his own, just because he was like, I don't want to deal with any of the shops, which, to each their own. I don't, that's something he wanted to do. Because, some people have bad experiences with shops, and that does suck, because I've definitely had bad experiences with shops, and it's at the end of the day, it's not a good feeling. So I guess my thing is, I've always said you could always get something from a class, even if it was a bad class, right? So I'm assuming that, you at least moving forward, what not to do, or you'll know kind of, how to go. Hopefully moving forward, you can find the positives out of this.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I'm sure that there are. Are there any positives that you can probably take?
Yeah, I mean, two that come to mind, I guess. One, on our deep dive, when my buddy was really having a hard time, I certainly was. It wasn't the easiest dive I've ever had, but it wasn't hard. And I did my stress and rescue with what I think are great instructors. They did a really, really great job. And I felt like, not that I was going to rescue that guy or whatever, that's what the instructor was there for, but I felt like if I needed to be a part of that to help him, I could have. And certainly reinforcing that, it's one thing to do that in the pool or in open water, but pretty easy, relatively speaking, scenarios of a stress and rescue class. It's another at, almost 100 feet to have somebody panic and look like they're going to rip the regulator out of your mouth, or he looked like he was going to rip it out of his mouth and try to swim to the surface. And, I did feel a little bit better, like, hey, that class was 10 years ago, but I remember some of this and I'm ready. Not that I ever want to have to use it, but that made me feel better. The other thing I think I got out of it was really just learning what to look for in an instructor and what not to look for, or, what to avoid, I should say.
I was literally going to mention that.
Yeah, that is probably the biggest takeaway. And like I said, I knew going into it, I didn't expect much, but honestly, the biggest thing for me is I was hoping to get my weight dialed in a little bit better, because my dry suit is relatively new to me, and I did my dry suit class again like 10 years ago, then haven't really dove one for a while. So I was really looking to that peak performance buoyancy class. I was like, I really want to get that dialed in and get a little bit of help of positioning it correctly to get the trim set, and I got none of that. So that was probably the biggest disappointment of the class, is like something that's really so easy, and like the one thing that you should be able to do on that peak performance buoyancy, I think, or one of them, I guess. He just ignored it completely. So that was a bummer for sure. No,
that is a bummer. And I do agree with your statement there about knowing what to look for in an instructor. I actually, I told myself a while back, I wish I probably would have gotten this early on, but I actually won't take a class from somebody unless I actually have a conversation with them first. So, because I know a lot of shops will go, like, they have that mentality of, they have sign-up dates, and then the student signs up, an instructor signs up. So sometimes you're not meeting your instructor until the day of the class, kind of like the scenario that you have. As I progress, I want to meet an instructor, hey, let's get on the phone. Let's have a 30-minute conversation. I need to know that we're going to click before I move forward into a class, because you could be the best instructor in the world, but if I don't click with you and we don't kind of find that even ground, then I won't. I'll still take something out of it, but I won't get the most I possibly can out of it. And that's definitely something I would suggest moving forward. And that's actually going to be my next question. Do you have any plans on moving forward? What are your thoughts? Are you going to... So you've done advanced. You said you did a rescue. So I guess the next step would be either specialties or a professional level. Any progression in the future?
Yeah, it's funny you ask. This summer I got out of diving for a little while when we had our daughter. Just got busy with work and kid and everything. And so this summer's really, I hit it pretty hard, and I've been binging anything that I can related to diving. And I found a YouTube channel that I really like the guys. They seem like funny, good instructors that really care about their students. They announced a nitrox class. So I signed up for that one. So that'll be in a couple weeks, and I'm excited about that one. Although I don't think around here really anybody does nitrox, but if I ever travel, that'll be a good one to have. And then I think I'd like to do some tech stuff. In the back of my mind, I think it'd be really great to do a rebreather. Although when we did our Lake Superior trip a few weeks ago, one of the guys was diving on a rebreather, and man, it looked like a lot of work. It looked like so much work. I was like, maybe I don't want to do that. But I like, one of the things I like about diving is the gear. All of my hobbies are expensive hobbies, and they tend to be things that require gear because I like the science of it. I like the idea of having to set this up and set that up, and that's kind of fun. So it definitely intrigues me. But I think my end goal, this just came to me the other day when I was reading another post by somebody. I would love to do something that relatively few people have done. And this particular post was talking about a wreck in one of the Great Lakes. I don't remember where, Michigan, I think, that they just found it a few years ago. And it's at 200 feet. And right now, single digits of divers have dove it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so they were inviting people on a trip, and I'm like, well, I certainly can't do that. I'm not going to go on a trip with a bunch of way more experienced people, even if I was close to experience for that. But I think something like that is kind of, maybe we'll say, my end goal. I don't need to explore a cave or something along those lines, but just the idea of being able to do something that relatively few people have done before is pretty cool. And see something like a wreck like that is pretty cool. I'm close to the Great Lakes, and that's some great wreck diving.
For sure. There's, some of probably one of the highest concentrations of wrecks. They're all a lot deep, or they're very deep, but if you get a chance, I don't know if you listen to the Great Dive podcast. Have you heard of them?
No, I don't think I've seen those guys.
The Great Dive podcast, they're based out of Michigan. And he's a great instructor. His name's James Mott. Usually if you Google or search scuba podcast, they're always the first, that pop up. I think they're one of the highest ratings. It's just the Great Dive podcast. James Mott. I'll send you a link. But
yeah, that'd be great.
He would be someone to look into, maybe getting some training with, and I've had a few conversations with him. He's a good guy. I would definitely reach out to him. I don't know exactly where in Michigan he is, but I know he's based out of the Great Lakes. So
okay. Yeah, that'd be, like I said, there's so many cool wrecks there, and we only got to dive 2 on our trip. It was a pretty short weekend, and they were 2 wrecks that people are like, they're not that great. They're pretty broken up, and man, I was blown away. I thought they were so cool, but for me, most of the dives I've done are in lakes with, like I said before, 10 feet of visibility if we're lucky. So being able to see 20 feet and actually see something that's not a weed or a rock was pretty cool. The only saltwater diving I've ever done was my wife and I took a trip to Jamaica, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, something like that. And I mentioned to a few people that we were going there and we were going to dive, and they're like, "Oh, Jamaica's not worth it. It's it's overfished and the reefs aren't very good." We got there and both of us were just blown away. We weren't planning on doing more than a dive or 2, and we dove both dives every day we were there because it was just incredible. And I'm sure it was not great diving compared to what other people see, but like I said, compared to a lake with a weed and a walleye, that's pretty cool.
When I taught in Texas, I would tell people, if you could have fun here, anywhere you go in the world, you'll have a blast. Like literally anywhere you go, it'll seem absolutely amazing. Because we would get catfish and maybe the occasional, freshwater turtle. But well, man, I'm really glad to hear that you're continuing to move forward. You were able to find some positives out of the negative, which it was a big negative. And and I'm glad that I reached out to you, and I'm really happy and pumped that you came on the podcast to speak about your experience.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out to me. I was pretty shocked. But yeah, this is a blast, and I think your podcast is great. I really hope it catches on. I've listened to every episode. I get a lot of time at work to listen to podcasts, so I listen to every episode, and man, you've got some really cool guests on.
Oh, right on. Well, awesome, man. I'll let you go, do your thing. And once again, dude, I really, really appreciate you coming on here, and I look forward to actually seeing, what is in store in the future. So I'll definitely have to keep in touch and see what happens.
For sure. Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Off-gassing, a scuba podcast.